Welcome to meeting 32 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 30th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact the French language used by private enterprises under Federal Jurisdiction Act, and to make related amendments to other acts. Today's meeting will be held in hybrid format in accordance with the order of the House adopted on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members may participate in person or using the Zoom application. There's only one panel today. It will last 90 minutes, and then we will have 30 minutes of committee business in camera. To ensure the meeting runs smoothly, I would like to pass along some instructions to witnesses and members. Before you speak, please wait for me to call your name. If you are participating online, click on the microphone icon to turn on your microphone. If not, please mute yourself. Regarding interpretation, for those of you who are on Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, you have the choice between the floor, English, or French. For those of you who are in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel you would like to hear. I remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be directed to the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For those of you who are on Zoom, please use your digital hand with the raise hand function. The clerk of the committee and I will do our best to maintain a speaking order, and we thank you in advance for your patience and understanding in this regard. As per our routine motion, I would like to inform the committee that all witnesses have completed their required login tests prior to the meeting. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Today, virtually, we have the Acadian Society of New Brunswick, represented by Alexandre Cédric Doucet, President, and Ali Chiasson, Executive Director. We have India
Awasti, et aussi le réseau pour le développement.
And we have the Réseau pour le développement de l'alphabétisme et des compétences with Madame Mona Odette, President, and Denis Desgagnés, Executive Director. Before we begin, what we'd like to do is to grant 5 minutes to each organization. They can share their opening remarks with 2 people, but they still have 5 minutes total. If you run out of time, don't worry. We will ask you questions and you can fill in any information that was left out of your presentation. So I ask you to be brief, or at least to respect your 5 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 15 or 30 seconds left so that you can act accordingly. So first we have the Société Acadienne du Nouveau-Brunswick with Monsieur Doucet. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and members of the public. Thank you for inviting me to appear before this committee to testify on the impending modernization of Canada's Official Languages Act. The modernization of this act has been long overdue. It's particularly important for Francophones in minority situations. This is because Francophones in minority communities, the Official Languages Act offers not only a guarantee of public service and real opportunities to participate in the Canadian public service, but also it recognizes their status and their place within the political and social system. The situation of Acadians is also exceptional. This is because the vast majority of them live in New Brunswick, the only officially bilingual province in Canada. The Société de l'Acadie du Nouveau-Brunswick is very supportive of the bill that was tabled by the federal government and would not want its adoption to be delayed in any way due to multiple proposed amendments. In our view, the bill does not need to be significantly altered because it pragmatically addresses all of the important elements that have been brought to the government's attention through multiple discussions in the House of Commons and Senate committees and through public consultations in all regions of Canada. As it was pointed out several times, including by the Commissioner of Official Languages, the greatest difficulties at the national level are not attributable to significant deficiencies in the legislation, but to institutional problems. We now have a bill that will mark a real advancement of bilingualism in Canada, and it is largely sufficient to supplement it with equally progressive regulations to ensure implementation. However, our purpose today is to identify the few issues that still require attention. of the government and the parliament to make some suggestions for addressing them. Some of the issues relate to the fact that there is no special status accorded to New Brunswick by virtue of the fact that it is a bilingual province that has its own official languages act that guarantees the provision of public services to all residents in all regions and not just where there is evidence of a significant or sufficient demand. In our view, the federal system should not, in the case of New Brunswick, provide services in the French language that are inferior to those provided by New Brunswick as a province. We suggest that the Act be amended to make this addition. With respect to immigration, it does not seem sufficient to state the importance of the contribution of Francophone immigration to the development of Francophone minorities. What's important is to ensure that Francophone immigration is significant enough to ensure that the demographic weight of the Francophone minority is sufficient to ensure its sustainability. In our view, there should be a clear statement that regulatory authorities will be granted the power to establish and ensure this balance. With respect to the public service, we need a specific clause for New Brunswick that should be added that states that the Government of Canada would set aside the application of general standards and provide access to federal services in both official languages throughout New Brunswick. It goes without saying that if services are offered in both official languages, the conditions relating to the possibility of working in French should be generally recognized. Let's talk about justice. We'd like to emphasize the importance of recognizing the right to be heard on appeal in French when the trial court hears the case in that language. And finally, as for the law on the use of French in private enterprises under federal jurisdiction, we would like to propose, as in the case of the public service, that the law be applied everywhere in New Brunswick and not only in the regions with a strong Francophone presence. Our intention is to ensure that New Brunswick's bilingual status is recognized in the private sector as well as in the public sector. Having said all of this, I reiterate that the time to act is now. It is important that the bill be adopted as soon as possible. With that, I thank you for your time and your openness in allowing us this opportunity to speak to your committee. I am now available to answer any questions you may have.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Doucette. 4 minutes and 10 seconds.
We'll hear from Indo Canada Organization, Mr. Awasthi, for you. The floor is for you for 5 minutes. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Essentially, I am here not to bury Caesar, but to praise him. And who is Caesar? Caesar is the two founding nations thesis. Caesar is the effect of the two founding nations thesis, namely official bilingualism. Official bilingualism and the two founding nations thesis are our founding principles. But in light of demographic change in our society over the past 40, 50, 60 years, we are now coming to a point where, in fact, diversity and greater diversity is challenging the two founding nations thesis. No longer, for example, in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, are the old English and French language nations dominant. They are no longer dominant. They are no longer the host societies. They are no longer the societies that actually integrate people into Canadian society. I do believe that what we should be talking about now is not official languages or official culture or official communities, because that is exclusionary. That is against the idea of greater accessibility and greater justice. What we should be talking about now is distinguishing between the language of officialdom versus the public language and the public need. And what is the public need? The public interest is far greater than just the interests of the English and French nations of Canada. We need greater access to services in languages other than English and in French, because people who come here or people who are raised here might not in fact be fluent or have mastered one of the official languages. So our public institutions are obliged to ensure that these people can, in fact, have access to these services. I mean, the Francophone community argues for the same thing for its nation. Other nations also deserve the same accessibility and the same equality. We don't get that. And I do believe that the Official Languages Act, the reforms that are being proposed, are in fact contrary to the idea of administrative justice. They are contrary to the idea of greater accessibility. We should now, again, with respect to Indigenous languages, we have not integrated the Indigenous Languages Act into the Official Languages Act. We have not given proper place to various nations and various needs. As I said before, the official languages or official culture is very narrow. It is exclusionary. It limits accessibility to our public institutions. We have to talk about the public need and the public voice, which is large, it is expansive, it is diverse, and our public institutions must actually serve those needs locally. It means saying, if you need services in a language other than English and French, we will try and offer you those services. If you need services to integrate into our economy, we'll do that for you. Right now, we're not doing that. Our institutions are not supporting multiculturalism, multilingualism. They are continuing to support this old idea of official languages and official bilingualism. It's no longer working. So I would call upon the government, again, to distinguish between the language of officialdom, which is internal, the internal expression of government, versus the public language and what the public need is and how the government communicates with the public. Those are very different ideas. Let's not stay stuck with this idea that we are a society founded by two founding nations. We're not. No longer there anymore. That happened 150 to 200 years ago. We're no longer there. And I think we should reflect that in our legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Awati. 4 minutes, 20 seconds. Nous allons maintenant nous tourner.
We will now move on to the Réseau pour le développement pour l'alphabétisme et des compétences. You have the floor. I don't know who will take the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Juste pour vous.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that I forgot the chargers for my special hearing device, given that I'm partially unable to hear. But so luckily I was lent one by the clerks here. Thank you so much. So let's go forward. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, chairman, kind members of this wonderful committee, thank you for receiving us here today. We're here today to discuss Bill C-13. We're at the verge of a historic change for Canada's official language communities. And we at RESTAC are pleased to take part in this historic shift. You have received our brief detailing the amendment that we ask be included in Article 41.3. In a nutshell, we propose an amendment to that section that sets out the federal government's commitment, and it reads as follows: to enhance opportunities for English and French linguistic minorities to obtain quality learning opportunities in their own languages throughout their lives, including from early childhood education through post-secondary education. So we agree with that part of it. The current wording evokes the education continuum, yes, institutions that offer training and formal recognition through certificates, diplomas. This includes schools, colleges, and universities. However, besides this formal learning continuum, there is a sector that offers non-formal learning opportunities. These two are structured activities, but not recognized with certificates or diplomas. Non-formal learning is an inherent result of planned activities that are not always explicitly designated or designed, rather, to be learning activities. With objectives, time allotted, and resources, people will sign up for non-formal learning, nevertheless, much as they do to a university or a college, and it's an important tool. Think of leadership training that for decades has been provided to youth by Francophone youth organizations across the country. Consider the training in identity building that ACELF provides to its teachers, training that companies give their employees, French language, family literacy, or Francization activities given by members of our network. The thousands of courses on digital platforms such as Coursera or YouTube. You know, there's a billion people who watch YouTube and such platforms. Think of digital technology training given to teachers, learners, seniors, professionals. A number of professionals have had to go back to digital technology training during the pandemic. So many informal activities, lectures, reading sessions, activities that allow people to learn without necessarily receiving a diploma for it. These are day-to-day activities that are work-related, family-related, and leisure-related. Why is it important to point this out? Internationally, organizations such as UNESCO are calling for the right to education for all, including learning in institutions, in companies, community organizations, on digital platforms, and so on and so forth. In today's world, ongoing education is a necessity, isn't it? We are all learning all the time. In Canada, major rethinking initiated by the Royal Bank, the Conference Board, the CMEC, and the federal government conclude that there's a need to support skills development. Doesn't Canada support the development of skills to succeed in a multitude of ways? Surely it does. In our network, RESDAC, which works in child education, literacy, and family literacy, we support adults who need to develop more and more skills to meet their obligations to their families, their professions, and civic or community life. In Canada's Francophonie, we have long relied collectively on such education continuums, and today our consensus that's newly emerging is to extend this continuum to lifelong learning, taking place in formal, informal, and non-formal contexts. As you see, this Act should not miss the opportunity to name what reality has already concluded, namely that lifelong learning in all its forms is part of our current reality. What forms might this take? Well, funding must be provided. Funding envelopes are created for such purposes. In the non-formal context, though, it's also necessary to ensure that organizations are able to respond to training needs, develop skills for success adapted to Francophone minority communities. You can translate from English into French, very good, but it's more important to have something well adapted to a real community. 10 seconds. So we're asking that the federal government commit to strengthening opportunities for English and French linguistic minorities to participate in quality formal, non-formal, and informal learning in their own languages throughout their lives, including from early childhood education to post-secondary education. Very important for the citizens of Canada. Thank you, thank you. We will begin a first round of questions. Each of the parties gets 6 minutes each per deputy. We begin with Mr. Godin, our first vice president of the Committee of Official Languages. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here, either in person or joining us virtually on Zoom. My first question is for the Acadian Society of New Brunswick. I would like to say that I somewhat disagree with Mr. Doucette to the effect that we need to move extremely rapidly and that this act seems to be satisfactory. If this fall we're going into discussions to see what might be improved, given that this act is going to be on the books for the next 50 years, then we have the same objective as you do, sir, except that we don't intend to get there using the same methods. So my first questions. The SANB has said in the past, the Acadian Society of New Brunswick has said that important needs where bilingual services are needed don't apply New Brunswick in as much as it is a specific society. C13 maintains the same level of important requests. Am I right? Yes, as I said in my opening remarks, according to our legal counsel, we could use regulations to solve our situation. So you're saying we needn't necessarily formally include it in Bill C-13. You're confident that regulations will suffice. The people working for your province now are working correctly, perhaps, but if we think of the future impact of this act, this bill that we're working on now, I think it's important to get it black and white in the act. But you don't think so? I think that, I certainly hope that if the federal government has had the good political sense to modernize the bill, there will also be sufficient political will to use it and to use the principles behind it, and we'll see that when we see the regulation action plan. Another question. The Commissioner feels that the obligations laid out in Section 4 are not clear enough. Does the obligation to actively offer support appear as well laid out as you would like? I think there should be a clause mentioning the linguistic specificities of New Brunswick where the request is sufficient does not apply to us. You're saying by regulation, but I'm saying the Commissioner's recommendation that the obligation to offer services be laid out more clearly. I'm not the Commissioner of Official Languages. Perhaps Mr. Thiberge could answer this question better than I can. Well, you will understand, Mr. Doucet, that we're all working together to improve this bill. The Commissioner, who works on this on a daily basis and who is called on to protect both official languages every single day that he goes to work, well, I think we can respect the recommendations, the ones he makes. He's making recommendations. You're not the Commissioner, and you seem to be somewhat evasive. That's the way I hear you. Well, yes, but perhaps I'll try to be a little clearer. We all hear various recommendations made by experts in constitutional and linguistic law. So, obviously, the intent is to improve the Act, but I think that we can solve our situation with regulations. Sorry. All right. So there would be linguistic clauses to help solve the federal provincial transfer issues. Mr. Doucet has said he agrees with this. Do you agree? Yes, absolutely. We're part of the CFA, but it's not a priority for our Acadian Society of New Brunswick right now. I know you're a member of the AFCA, but it has provided, or FCFA, the Fédération des Communautés Francophones, but you don't seem to be in agreement with what they're suggesting. I stick to my guns. We see that our field at C13 is a step forward and an improvement to the institutions of Canada. And if it's carried tomorrow morning, I think that we could go ahead using it, and there'll be a lot to do to see to it that it's well applied. I understand that we'd be able to go ahead, or that that's your position, but we as legislators would like to ensure that this be a strong bill that will survive through time. So I'm not trying to just get it through and then kind of get going at regulations and doing my best with it. I'd like to make it as good an act as possible. Do you think that we could bring forward precise amendments such that tomorrow we're dealing with a decline in French in New Brunswick, for example, that would call for action? Well, we could write the best acts as we can, but if no one has the political will to use them, we won't do anything. Well, that's why we need a law that has teeth and need to take the time to do so. Yes, of course we have to move quickly to bring an end to the decline of use of French, but also we should use the recommendations made by people of goodwill who are in a position to make recommendations. 15 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Doucet. Thank you, Mr. Gaudin and Mr. Doucet. The next questions will be put by Ms. Ariel Kayabaga. 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will begin by thanking our guests, our witnesses here today, to help us move forward in our study of this act, which is of such high importance for so many communities, including mine. I'm from Ontario, a Francophone minority community. It's very important to hear all of you on these matters. I would like to turn back to Mr. Doucet. It has been said just now that C13 would last for another 50 years before it would be reviewed again. But in the Act, it is well written that it can be reviewed every 10 years. So what do you feel about that? The possibility of being reviewed every 10 years, what impact might that have on your community? Well, We certainly favor the amendments to the Act, or at least the amendment that would ensure that it be reviewed every 10 years. This would fit with New Brunswick legislation and would be satisfactory to us, as it would force the federal government to undertake a review process every decade and would make all this predictable. May I add that even if we have such a clause about 10 years, nothing prevents the federal government from modernizing any act in 5 years or 4 years, but at least every 10 years. All right, we agree that we're all looking for legislation that supports Francophones across Canada. We also want to continue to grow the Francophone population everywhere in Canada, not only in Quebec. And you've mentioned that it's an urgent matter to adopt this act. Tell us more about that. Why is it such an urgent matter, and what are the issues that lead you to think we should adapt it very quickly? Adopt it quickly. And adapt it and adopt it. Well, the 2021 census finds that the Francophone population is in decline, in particular in New Brunswick, more so than elsewhere in Canada. The last time the Act was modernized, I wasn't even born at that time. It's taken more than 6 years to apply the Act. So I don't think that as a bilingual federal country, we can afford to wait any longer to modernize it and adopt the modernization. Our group, like many groups in the field, are working very hard. We've put in a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources on this legislation since 2016. So we're impatient. We're looking forward to being able to work on applying it. Bill C-13 includes Canada's undertaking to facilitate the ability of Francophone and Anglophone minority communities to receive quality training in their own languages throughout their lives, from early childhood through postgraduate or education. How will this improve the situations of Francophone minority communities? You may both answer. Yes. Pleasure to answer. You know, formal education, it can be universities. There are universities. At least it's been discussed for Ontario. But what we would really like to build with you is the informal and informal sectors, which can allow people to share their competence, their skills in trainings outside of university. For example, the NCF training, which allows you to discover who you are, what your skills are, where you should head in your lives, and so on. So we work with community groups in communities. If we were given a possibility to demonstrate that when people are looking for jobs, being able to help them identify their competencies, their skills, with sort of a digital badge they could get. This could help a lot. This would reassure future employers. It's very nice to say that you have skills in such and such, but if you've got a paper showing it, that someone else has discussed this with you as too, this is really helpful to employers and to universities and colleges as well. Let's say that you've got a youth who's gotten through 12th grade, but then has another course with an informal organization. If they're able to prove that they've accomplished something there, this gives them a better chance of being accepted at a university or at a college. What do you think the roles of provincial and territorial governments are to reach this objective? Well, we certainly understand that there are agreements with the provinces and territories. I think that linguistic clauses should be embedded in them, clarifying that provinces must interact with the Francophone communities, the Francophonie, in each of their territories and provinces to really draw up a proper list of the needs of these communities. That's not being done now. It's important to ensure that we work on those clauses then. The federal government, were it to work with the Francophone minority community, I mean, we put out reports on organizations that support us and so on, and we could work on some of the clauses in a very concrete way. Is that a good answer? 10 seconds. Thank you. So would be a positive outcome for you? positive measures. Oh, I'm so sorry. We've run through your time. You'll get back to this later, I hope. The next 6 minutes of questions are for our second Vice President, Mr. Mario Beaulieu. Hello, and thank you to our witnesses for your participation here today. My first question is for Mr. Alexandre Cédric Doucet. All right, you've spoken of political will, the federal government appointing a lieutenant governor that doesn't speak French in New Brunswick, who goes to the courts to contest all this, all the examples that we can think of the Official Languages Act not being respected. Do you think it would be wise to have confidence in the government that it's going to apply the right regulations rather than actually getting it into the Act? I'm not here to discuss politics, but in the current legislative context as it stands, as it's being presented, there are indeed some major improvements, very useful improvements, and we have no difficulty working with the bill as it stands if it were adopted tomorrow morning. Now, as to the lieutenant governor, we have a court date, 2023. We're going to appeal. So there will be a possibility of solving that, hopefully at that time. I think that around the table there is considerable political will, to support Francophone minority communities outside of Quebec. So I think that there is a possibility that we'll be able to move forward on C-13 in order to draw up a much stronger piece of legislation. Of course, you're welcome to your opinion, but I do think it's much wiser to include directly in the legislation the changes that you're hoping for. When it comes to the substantive demand, where numbers justify it, where the population justifies it, wouldn't it be smart to get that in some wording or other directly in the Act itself to ensure that something be done with this concept? It would be possible to include a clause, a provision within the Act itself, but legal counsel tells us that it would also be possible to reach the same objectives using regulations on this matter and also on the federally regulated private businesses. So, yeah, it's a possibility, but we can also work with regulations to the same aim. So you have nothing to request for a review of C-13 right now? No, we have no specific requests, given that we think we can solve all the problems we have through regulations. So you think that the current C-13 suffices? Do you think there's anything in it? Do you think there's something in it that will provide enough power to counter the decline in the Francophone population in New Brunswick? Well, look, it's a matter of applying it, how it's applied. There are surely very useful tools available based on C-13 that can have a real effect in New Brunswick. Okay, you've mentioned the Francophone immigration in New Brunswick, regulatory approaches to set objectives. What would your objectives be? I think the objectives are set in regulations. I think, Mr. Beaulieu, that you do understand our position on this. New Brunswick is the other province, other than Quebec, that has a very strong Francophone population. It's not so a matter of targets or standards. It's a matter of autonomy. We think that New Brunswick should be as autonomous as possible in its selection of immigrants for its province, such that New Brunswick could rebalance its populations across the two official minority communities or two official language communities. And that would be one way to counter the decreasing Francophone population in New Brunswick. My next question is for the representatives of REDSAC. You said a good deal of non-formal education about that can favor literacy and so on and so forth. But How can such activities be evaluated? Informal training, exams tailored to that context? I'm just trying to see what structure we could provide.
Le travail qu'on a fait auprès du
Of course, in the work we have done in RESDAC, we really thought about it a lot. Clearly, we will have to develop tools. We'll need develop new ways of thinking, how to assess skills, because what's important in those non-formal training, it's reading, among other things. But RESDAC will put into place assessments. We want to have a center of expertise as well. This will be part of it to be able to assess correctly, but also to target what people are learning in different contexts. When we're talking non-formal, formal, and informal, we're talking about all community organizations. We're talking about institutions. We're talking about women organizations who are doing non-formal. We could have decided to talk only about literacy, but we wanted to demonstrate that non-formal was more important for citizens of Canada. It's really the foundation, and it's our will to recognize all non-formal training with citizens. Thank you very much, Madame Odette, Mr. Beaulieu. Next question, 6 minutes, Ms. Ashton. Thank you very much. And thank you to all witnesses who are with us today. I would like, on our part, to Ms. Ashton, I don't think you selected your headset, or it's not connected. Or try again. Can you hear me now? Yes, go ahead. Thank you. So a big thank you once again. And I would like to start by saying on our part, I would like to underline that we would like to move forward as early as possible with this study on this bill. But we are in a historic moment. We must not lose the opportunity of improving this bill for all communities in the country, and we hope the government will move forward with the main amendments that were proposed for us to be able to make a difference for the communities on the ground. I would like to start my question with Ms. Odette. Ms. Odette, we've spoken quite often of the importance of protecting the continuum in education from early childhood to post-secondary. I think that what you said that it has to include adult training, and this is something that our committee did recognize, but that the law doesn't recognize yet. To remedy this situation, we have a simple amendment. Can you tell us more about the language we should be using rather than using the language from the committee in 2018, which insists on the fact about the continuum of education. Okay, what could I say? When we're talking about the learning from early childhood to post-secondary, we always forget the non-formal and informal training, which is part of this global continuum. We are members of the education table with various partners. FCEA is there, the universities are there, and we worked on this topic of knowledge. Everybody agrees that we have a consensus. We have to change education today to make it more inclusive for tomorrow's future. I'm thinking about my grandkids. If we can recognize them during judo training, they get such a skill. Yes, it's a child, but later in life, they'll be able to use these skills and this knowledge. So if the 3 words that we are suggesting, formal, non-formal, informal, it will include all learning in Canada. It's already being done in some places. Let's look at South Africa, New Zealand, other places. They've already thought about it with UNESCO, CMEC. They've already thought about all of this. So what we want is for the learning, long life learning becomes a whole for all citizens. I hope I give you a good answer. Denis could also give you a better answer than me because he's a member of the education table. No, that was very good. I think we understood your message clearly. Thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Doucette regarding immigration. We know to what extent immigration is important, but still the bill does not include this importance of catching up with the immigration targets. You've mentioned in the past that the target of 4.4% of Francophone immigration would harm New Brunswick. But even though this target was never reached, we think this bill doesn't go far enough, and we have to talk about a catch-up clause. Do you agree with this? And do you think that these clauses which deal with each province should be part of the bill? As you know, my mandate is to speak on behalf of the French Acadian population. I think this Bill C-13 doesn't go far enough in that respect, perhaps. But as you know, the Section 95 of the Act of 1867 talks about shared jurisdictions. Since Quebec had this agreement at the end of the 70s, we think New Brunswick should have the same agreement with the federal government to have more powers in immigration. So this issue of immigration for New Brunswick and Acadie is a little bit outside of the scope of Bill C-13 because you think it's up to New Brunswick to play a greater role in provincial federal negotiations. 1 minute. My next question is for Mr. Chiasson. It's this issue of the central agency. Do you think we should amend the law to give more power to the Treasury Board to be able to manage this bill and to promote the rights of Francophones throughout the country? Well, I notice, and I'm consistent in my message regarding this article. I'm a bit ambivalent. This notion of who ultimately should be responsible. You have 10 seconds, Mr. Chiasson. However, what I think we should focus on the fact that for a long time, there's been a lack of imagination, and I don't think it's the law which prevents people from doing things differently. Thank you. This is all the time we have for now. We have a new round of questions. We'll have 5 minutes from Monsieur Gourde. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Doucet. The Official Languages Commissioner insists on the importance of a central agency. I would like to hear your position regarding the Commissioner's request in that respect. Well, look, regarding from a legal point of view, I think it's probably the best proposal we could put forward right now. However, when we listen to experts in public administration who work for Treasury Board earlier, for example, they will tell us that Treasury Board doesn't really deal with these issues. I heard the analogy that the Treasury Board is like the goalie in a soccer field, as we say. So I'm no expert in public administration, but when I consult these experts, that's what people say. Thank you, Mr. Doucet. My next question is from Madame Audet. Quebec is asking that C-13 be amended to recognize the specificity. Are you in favor of such an amendment? Because the Quebec challenges the specific. Denis, you'll have to give me a hand here. Well, RESDAC works with the Acadian Francophone communities. we are really specialized in the Canadian francophonie. We're linked to the francophonie in Quebec. I think Quebecers are better represented to talk about their destiny, and we associate ourselves with them. But right now, based on everything that the FCA has done, we were part of all of this, and the positions of the FCFA, we're in agreement with that. Could you tell us about the immigration targets for Francophones outside Quebec, even in Quebec, actually? What can we do to help? Because we know that when immigrants come here, there's a partly integration. There would be perhaps need for help. Absolutely. We, the RESDAC, we work in this immigration network. We work on skills, as our president was just saying before. We try to work with Immigration Canada within our field of knowledge. Madame Odette works with a lot of newcomers in Manitoba. Clearly, the FCFA did its work. We were part of this. There's a lot of catching up to do. We have to review the targets, and we have to be able, we have to be able to reach our goals together. But as a partnership, absolutely, we're part of this role and of this, and we have a role to play in this. There's a huge labor shortage in Quebec right now. 250,000 good jobs are available, and English Canada seems to be ignoring Quebec. We have invested so much effort in the 40 and younger generation. The unemployment rate is much higher in Western provinces than in Quebec. Well, I mean, we're looking throughout the world for people to fill those vacancies. Perhaps we could work together on this. Very quickly, the shortage is everywhere in Canada. This labor shortage. The Canadian francophonie is also a victim of this shortage, labor shortage, and perhaps with being ignored by the provinces as well. If we had a mechanism to help the Canadian francophonie to work with its governments, sometimes we welcome immigrants who arrived in Quebec and come back to us later. Our destiny is linked, Mr. Member of Parliament. Thank you. You have 20 seconds? No, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Next question is from Francis Drouin. Mr. Drouin, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank all of our witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Doucet. You said that you wanted to make sure that the law protects services, French services in New Brunswick to the same extent that New Brunswick does. Which amendment would be required to make sure that we do get that? Well, there should be a grandfather clause which would ensure that there's a sufficient need. You know, where the demand is sufficient, it's only in the north part of the province where French is in a minority situation. But just to give you an example, in the Saint-Jean region, where Acadians are in a minority situation, there's more Acadians in Saint-Jean than in Caraquette, for example. But the communication services are not offered in all services in the Saint-Jean region. So that's why we think to counter the decline in the French fact, there's needs to have a change in the Charter of Rights, which recognizes the specificity of New Brunswick, and some rules could be added as well. I think that the law must reflect the reality of families and of people who are moving elsewhere and who want to live pretty much everywhere. As a Franco-Ontarian, we could find all the francophones in the eastern part of Ottawa, and now they're all over Ottawa, and it creates issues for service providers. And I understand what you're talking about. Madame Audet, you mentioned, I think my colleagues mentioned it as well, you talked about training, informal training, and to provide certificates to recognize this. When you're mentioning certificates, are skills being recognized by the provinces or are they recognized by the service providers? Can you hear me? Yes. What I wanted to say earlier, yes, it's with the RESDAC, but the RESDAC with partner up with other education stakeholders, and we want to make sure that we have good assessments on the knowledge that these people will be acquiring in formal and non-formal trainings. We'll work with experts in education and teaching to make sure that we recognize the knowledge and the skills that the people will have when they get a certificate. Okay, I understand. And I work quite often with employment services at the local level, recognizing skills. It's important to employers, but employers must also know that this is official recognition. We have to make sure that employers know. Yes, of course, we have to work closely with employers because they are the ones who will hire people. What we experience in Manitoba and elsewhere, nobody is in charge of recognizing skills. We have doctors, we have dentists, we have people with incredible skills, but they're not recognized by the various orders. These people will work in jobs, which are not so skilled, and it's a lack of knowledge, loss of skills. We need doctors, we need nurses, we need teachers, we need these people in the health field. So recognizing skills is very important. I love what you said. You're saying exactly what I say all the time, but how do we link this with Bill C-13? And how could we amend the bill so we could reflect? Well, Monsieur Drouin, precisely. If the government of Canada can recognize the formal and the informal, we will all win. Your voters will win. My kids, my grandkids, citizens everywhere in Canada will come out winners. We have the certificates, the recognitions for what is formal. It's not everybody who will get a diploma or certificate, but if they have it, they will be able to use it. People who work in employment, regardless, there will be a recognition. Right now, there's no recognition whatsoever of these kinds of training, and that's why we want it to be included in the law. Thank you, Madame Audet. Next one, 2.5 minutes, Mr. Beaulieu. What you are saying is that people who are providing this informal training or non-formal do not necessarily have recognition themselves. How can we select the people? I'm not sure I understand your question, Mr. Chair. Earlier you said that people who do those trainings, this non-formal or informal training, do not necessarily have a recognized skill. No, I wasn't saying this. I was saying the people who follow the training. The people who will follow the training will not be recognized after the training. I can tell you that the trainers in literacy in various fields, we have sometimes retired teachers who will help us with literacy, with the digital training. These people are quality people. We have one of our Ontarian partners who is developing with a university. There's training available for trainers in literacy. And à Pluriel in Manitoba, it's retired teachers who are working for me. Thankfully, they agree to work for a very low salary because they believe in the development of communities. But this is the recognition of the people who will follow the training, who will take the training. Maybe I did not express myself clearly. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Thanks to you. But for people to get this recognition, I understand. I worked in literacy before, and I worked in an organization. But however, the people who were training, we were giving them a recognition, but it was not official. But within the Official Languages Act, what you're saying is that by recognizing the importance of the formal, non-formal, informal context, that the government can, within the Official Languages Act, support financially your organization or other organization to help the services.
Nous, on parle de financement.
We talk about funding, but we also have to accept that people get recognized. My colleague can tell you more, but we're not really talking about funding here. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Your time is up. Mrs. Ashton, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. My question is for Ms. Odette. I'd like to know more about the work that she and her organization does. We've heard some statistics this summer about the number of people who speak French at home. That number is going down throughout Canada. Can she or her team tell us more about the challenges that you're facing? As a committee, we need to understand the challenges that you face so that we can support you. I'll allow myself to talk about Manitoba, Ms. Ashton. We are from the same province, and it's true that French is declining. It's true that if we don't all work together, it will continue to decline. Let's take Manitoba as an example, and Denis, if I talk too much about it, you can stop me. Pluriel has 10 literacy centers throughout Manitoba. We have 1,200 homework help centers to support students. We receive tiny amounts of money from the province. I don't know how much money the province gets for Francophone training. We are just a part of the process. We don't get consulted. Of course, we could do more, but at a certain point, money matters. You understand how these things work. We want to help immigrants. We want to help women who are settling here to learn French, to improve their French. There are many people who already speak French, but if we talk about refugees, often they didn't have the opportunity to get education in their own countries. So they have to start from the very start of literacy, and this takes a lot more time. Yes, Francophones are going down in numbers, but by working together, we can turn the tide. We're asking you to include formal and non-formal training so that more people can participate in our programs and to enrich our French language, my French language. Thank you, Ms. Odette. We're now moving on to 5-minute questions with Monsieur Lehoux. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today. I have a question for Ms. Odette. The BC Francophone Federation has fought the linguistic clauses. They've fought for them. Do you support this? Is this something that you need as well? Yes, absolutely. I just gave you an example. When we say that there's funding that is sent from the federal government to the provincial governments, yes, the people in education will negotiate with the provinces and the federal government, but other groups don't fund us. So yes, we think that we need well-defined linguistic clauses. And we think that Francophones should be consulted about their needs. Here's a more precise question about workers. How does the workers' shortage affect Francophones outside of Quebec? We know that there's an issue for Francophones outside of Quebec. There's a labor shortage. So tell us about the labor shortage outside of Quebec and whether or not it affects Francophones outside of Quebec. Of course, there are labor shortages everywhere. Denis can tell us more. How does it harm Francophones? Well, I would say that it's dramatic. It's dramatic for the economic and social development of communities and businesses. If we want businesses that are Francophone, we need a Francophone labor force. So we work with the economic sector to make sure that skills are there, either for people like Ms. Audet mentioned, newcomers, or people who are already working who have to improve their skills to access better jobs. In your opening remarks, Ms. Audet, you talked about continuing education. Do you have any suggestions you could make about that could be included in the bill through amendments? Are you talking about lifelong learning? Yes. So amendments that could be included in the bill to reinforce the act. If you include the wording that we mentioned about formal and non-formal learning, we would already be well ahead. We've also worked with the FCFA, and I think that you can continue working with them. But if we included those two words, that would be progress already. So you said that you support linguistic clauses. Can you give us some concrete examples of what you'd like to see? I can give you many examples. It could be with Employment and Social Development Canada. We heard about the case in British Columbia. Currently, we need to agree on skills. $300 million were invested in provinces. Our members on the ground are doing what they can to consult. But if you consider the percentage of Francophones, we're not part of the priorities. We could talk about immigration and early childhood education. So there are just plenty of examples. Let's talk about immigration. Should the article in C13 speak directly to immigration, training, and economic targets? Should we be connecting the dots between these three concepts? I think that C13, with the amendments that have been requested by the FCFA and the RESDAX amendments, you would have a structure that holds water. You would have targets. The structure of the Act, with linguistic clauses, with immigration, and with all the elements that we've asked you to improve, would have an important impact, in our opinion. So if we talk about small amendments, formal, informal, and non-formal, we can continue to build a holistic education continuum. By working together on this continuum to recognize credits, this is something Quebec does well. The United States do it too. Other countries do it. There's a methodology here. So if we recognize the full continuum of education and pair it with the labor market, that would be good. 5 minutes for Mr. Iacono. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank our witnesses for being here this morning. Ms. Audet, in your brief, you suggest that we reformulate Section 41.3 to include wording around formal, informal, and non-formal education. Do you think that the government should intervene to reinforce learning opportunities in an informal setting? Would that be an excessive incursion into people's private lives? No, I don't think so. Why would this harm people's private life? I don't understand. Well, when we read your definition, you refer to learning in an informal context. Maybe you can tell us more about what you mean by that. My question is about informal learning that you were speaking to. Informal learning would be reading documents, personal research. I can describe what the UNESCO defines it as, so I don't need to describe formal learning. Non-formal learning corresponds to acquiring additional I'm sorry, I don't have much time. I have read it. That's why I'm asking you the question. Between what UNESCO says on informal learning, I'd like to hear what you think about it with regards to persons' private life. I'm so sorry. I don't understand what you're getting at. I think that in the context of learning in the education continuum is someone who would go do an internship at a law firm, for example. So this would be informal learning. It could be workers that work together, welders that work together. So that's something that would allow us to put in place some strategies that would help us build a continuum where we can help people acquire skills in a minority setting, and it would allow us to have more effective strategies for lifelong learning. Great. In a context where unilingualism is taking over with informal and formal language, do you see this as a threat to minority language communities? Yes, we do feel threatened. Our colleagues have mentioned it. Statistics are clear. At the international studies level in Canada, 52% is beneath level 3. Level 3 is the level of language understanding that allows you to thrive and to grow. 52% of our francophones don't reach that score. And most people were asked to respond to that survey in English. So definitely RESDAC has work to do. How do you feel the federal government can counteract that to protect minority language communities? What we're seeking with this amendment is to create a more synergistic learning continuum. We want to work together to support lifelong learning. Thank you. How do you see the federal government's intervention in informal learning? It could help us to continue to work towards a more holistic definition for the learning continuum and to have a better definition of skills and competencies that is better suited to our minority situation. Thank you. According to your organization, what are the main impacts of the learning continuum with regards to the vitality of minority language communities? My goodness, there's so much work to be done here. I could tell you about this for 10 minutes. But socially, with all of our organizations, let's think about the Minister of the Treasury Board who's from our communities, who has received this citizen action education. This would allow our francophones in minority situations to gain the skills that they need to thrive in the workplace. One more question. You speak often about the difference between informal, formal, and non-formal education. In everyday language, can you define these 3 points so that we can better understand? Mr. Iacono, unfortunately, your time is up. We won't be able to have an answer. Next question, Mario Beaulieu, you have 2 minutes. I will allow you to answer that question. Well, we understand this. So K to 12? College, university with credits, that's formal. Non-formal is organized learning. It could be a training session that an organization gives that a business will provide for its employees, or anything that you can go get on YouTube. It's training, a tutorial that you could download. So this is organized. You have an appointment at a certain time and you do the training. And then the informal is something that happens every day. It's not structured. For example, you and your caucus can learn together from each other. And all of that is part of a learning continuum. When the whole continuum works together, we have some synergistic effects that are extraordinary. You said that in Quebec there is a special methodology about this. Can you tell us more? Yes, there are many methodologies that exist throughout the world. There are new digital badges. There's funding that exists. Quebec is an example of what can happen here in Canada. You know, we are learning from our colleagues in Quebec about methodologies that we can implement in our province. We have a pilot project with the COFA that is testing the approach in Quebec. So what is your organization's mandate with regards to Quebec? Well, we work with Quebec. We learn from our colleagues in Quebec. We work internationally together. We have been part of UNESCO's consultations in Morocco. So we're part of an international network. Our neighbors in Quebec are connected to us through the Canadian Francophonie, and so we have partners in Quebec. Earlier, you said that there were 52% of Francophones that don't have a functional level of literacy. Do you see this in Quebec as well? Well, rates are better in Quebec compared to the Canadian Francophonie. This is an average, but I just wanted to be clear about level 3. Level 3 is the level of understanding where you can thrive. So there are people at level 1 and 2 who are very functional. And how do you explain this? There are 15 seconds left. I think that the education continuum is at play. We spent a lot of time on pedagogy, but we didn't work on specific skills together. Next question goes to Ms. Ashton. You have the floor. Thank you. I wanted to raise one of the points that Ms. Odette brought forward. This is part of the feedback that I hear often from my Francophone communities outside of Quebec, including here in Manitoba. And this is the idea of the need to build a Francophone community. Here in Tonsum, outside of our French school and our immersion school, there are no activities or opportunities to get together as a community outside of school hours. What is often mentioned is the idea of resources. We don't know what resources come from the federal government to the provincial government. The provincial government doesn't support us here. Do you think it's important to have clear resources that are sent to community organizations? I think this reflects the idea of the linguistic clauses in provincial federal agreements. This is something that the FCFA suggested as an amendment. Can you tell us what you think about this? I'm trying to gather my thoughts to be clear. You know, when we work in Francophone communities and work in this field for many years, this is my case in Manitoba and Ontario, everywhere, visiting rural communities is just as important as offering programs in the cities. But often the resources are not there and we don't have the ability to go to these communities. Colleges and universities can't build centers outside of urban centers. So when we talk about linguistic clauses, we have to make sure that they respond to the needs of Francophone communities. If I think about Manitoba, I would talk about Thompson. I would talk about all the places where the schools offer programming that can help school clientele. For example, the parents and the adults that live around the children to have services to make sure that we can continue to build on the French language and to live it in the community. So there is much work that needs to be done. but we often forget what community needs are. There are so many things we can do for our beautiful Francophone communities. So that is the end of this portion of the meeting. I would first like to thank our witnesses for coming. If you believe there is any additional information that could be useful for this committee in producing its report on the Modernization of the Official Languages Act, please do not hesitate to send us any information that you think would be relevant for us. You can send this information in written form to our clerk, and she will share it with all of the members of the committee. That being said, we will have to end the Zoom meeting online. For members who will be joining the committee business later, you have to join the other meeting, and we are now adjourned. Thank you. Oh, so sorry, it is suspended. you.